Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of my stream. I'm Roger Hanson, and today my topic is going to be ancient history. Um, Before we start, I'd like to introduce Karma Love. Say hi, Karma.
Hi, everyone.
Now, earlier, I was planning on maybe doing something with Robot concerning um, the beginning of the industrial age, but we were talking, and the topic I had, he wasn't really too interested in. So I decided that instead of doing the industrial age, maybe I'll just go ahead and continue with what I had done last week and go over some stuff with ancient history. I really want to go through the Phoenician history too, because I think that is something that I really do want to talk about. Me and Robot had a little bit of a conversation there.
What did you say? I apologize. I apologize. I got distracted for a second. You said, what about history? No, never nothing much, too much about history. And when you said you're going to do Phoenician, I saw in the chat, but yeah, I don't know too much. So I'll be tuned in and just observing.
Yeah, I know if Robot shows up, he'd probably enjoy the topic anyhow.
Oh, yeah, I think I saw in the chat he said he was going to tune in. Maybe you should tag him or something and tell him.
So basically,
Okay.
the topic is going to go according to kind of one of the conversations
Okay.
me and Robot had just the other day, and it was about you see Phoenician history, and the truth is he's right. There really isn't anything documented concerning Phoenician history. Most of what was written or is left behind is what people who were against the Phoenicians usually wrote, and that's going to lead into the first character that I'm wanting to talk about, and he is known as Eusebius of Caesarea, and he lived between 260 to 341 AD. He's also known as Eusebia
Hmm.
Pampili. He
So
was a bishop.
there's going to be some sort of bias, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, there is going to be bias, and the reason for that is because of what me and Robot was discussing. There really isn't very much information when it comes to
Hmm.
Phoenician history. The thing about it is there's literally nothing in Phoenician that is about their culture, about their society, or anything. It was pretty much destroyed by the um, people who were opposing them, and the reason for that was like there was a really big war back then that took place between the Phoenicians and the Greeks. And the Greeks were notorious for doing that whenever they had enemies, like the Persians, for example. They did the same with them. They would try to destroy everything that pertained to them. And you can see that all over history, where societies and cultures have destroyed their enemies' literature and stuff of that nature. But basically, that's what happened. For us to get any proper kind of information, we've actually had to dig into uh, the records of those enemies that of the Phoenicians, and kind of get like little quotations here and little quotations there, or fragments of information that pertains to them. Um, it's sad to say, but yeah, a lot of that information is gone, and the only thing that we have to go off of is the Phoenicians' enemies themselves, who did what they did with the text and stuff like that concerning the Phoenicians. So um, that's kind of what I'm gonna go into with the first person that I'm about ready to talk about.
So there's no, because I'm looking now, just listening to you, and then I'm like looking at the map, and because like I know I'm more familiar just based off of the stuff that you've been talking about in regards to their culture. Excuse me, hold on. Most High bless you. And then I'm more regards into that, like familiarity. But when it comes to like exactly who they are and their history just in general, I have no, like I said, no call. And then I'm looking at it because they have like hieroglyphics here and they're close to Egypt, but it looks like they're more part of Asia. Is that right? Or because it looks, how can they be so close?
Yeah, the Phoenicians were mostly located up near Greece. You know where Greece is? It's right up around there, around Turkey,
Yeah, I see
in
that
that
here.
area.
Yeah, Greece, and then it's like Anatolia or something. But then, like where it's showing it is like it. So it start. It says Lebanon. That's what it says. Okie dokie.
Yeah, that's actually like the heartland of, or the center of their kingdom.
That's what I see here. It's like three different maps. Like this is weird.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I don't know if you've ever
Yeah.
heard of the Iliads, but Troy was a part of the Phoenician Empire, and it was located right there in that general area. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, the Iliads. I had to read that in school. The Iliads. That's the only reason I am familiar with that. But that I only we only read the Iliads. We didn't read the whole book. Just,
So yeah, the thing about um, the Phoenician Empire is it was huge. It covered a lot of area from that area that I just mentioned to, Carthian, and there was a lot of different conflicts that took place. I think there was like 3 wars between Greece and Phoenicia, maybe 2, but a lot of the information got screwed up. Basically, it got destroyed, and it took a lot of people coming together and piecing a lot of fragments of information together that was most or pretty much all from the Greek who were against them, and like things did get pretty messed up on information. Like I mentioned Sitchin before, and like Sitchin, everybody believed took his information off of the Sumerians, but he even said it in an interview that it was off of the Hittites, which in reality they found out later it was actually Phoenician history, and the Phoenicians and the Hittites back then, their stories kind of got intertwined with one another, and people got them confused.
okay, so how do we differentiate? Like, how do we know for certain? Like, where is it where we can kind of like I would like to say directly trace. I know there's always going to be a little bit of waves, but I mean, like, how, if it's getting mixed up and signals are getting crossed, okay, see, they have stones here, the Hittites do. They have, yeah, I see that. So that kind of talking about, so, but they're different. And that's probably how they were able to just go ahead and say these are them. And then, but still with the Phoenicians not having any real information, that's really interesting. Something, there's a reason for that. Because everyone has a little bit of something. Like they disappeared without a trace.
No, it's quite the opposite. They didn't really disappear without a trace. You have to understand something. there was a lot of animosity between the Greeks and the Phoenicians. It actually spanned for a pretty lengthy amount of time. I think there was three, maybe two wars between them, and in this time, there was a lot of animosity that built up, like I said, and you know, Greece. Everybody makes it out like Greece is always like the good guys, and that's because most of Western society is built on Greece beliefs, and stuff like that, belief backgrounds, history, and the truth is Greece had repeatedly done this to people. They would their enemies, if they had a problem with their enemies, they would decimate them, and not only decimated them, but they wanted to get rid of everything. They wanted to get rid of their history, their stories, everything. But the only thing is as hard as they tried to do this, they couldn't get rid of it. It actually blended into their beliefs. So you have a lot of
Right,
Phoenician
especially when you think about
myths and
the
the history blended in with Greek history, which also happened in Egypt as well. And no matter how much they tried, but they did try. They tried their damnedest to just make them vanish from the face of the earth and never exist. Um, and it took a while.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's just like traditional history is so misinforming.
So you need to understand that a lot of the things that we've been taught all throughout our time and before that up to
Hmm.
this point has been basically taught out of Greek mythology, Greek traditions, and we have a society that's been raised up on learning Greek history and Greek thought since that time period, when in fact there was a lot more history that should have been available to people when it
I
comes
did say
to
so.
history. Um,
It's so normalized. Not that's yeah. It's just like yeah, that's what we do, and it's not normalized at all. Hold on one moment. I'm still listening, but I have to multitask for like give me 3 to 4 minutes, but I'm still listening. Okay.
all right, so continuing on, I was talking about Eusebius of Caesarea. He was Eusebius of Pamphylia. Also, he was a bishop of Caesarea in Palestine. And he was also considered the father of church history. Um, he was a scholar and presbyter in the church at Caesarea. His major work was his history of the church, like I mentioned, and it was a massive piece of research that preserved quotations from older writers that would have been lost, specifically for researchers of Phoenician history. Now, the extracts from his book was from his book called Preparatio Evangelica, or Preparation for the Gospel. Now, uh, the, it's taken from a translation by E.H. Gifford in 1903, and it's a considerable gist of Phoenician theology that was made available. In fact, Phoenician history contained in his book is the oldest non-coded document of the Western what the Western world's historical archives has. Furthermore, it is particularly valuable because its author, Sena Chiniafion. I've always had a hard time saying his name, but that that is one of the references that he used in his argument, and is contained in his book.
And this was the guy who wrote the preparation of the gospel.
No, Santa Chananathian is an earlier writer that he used in his book as for quotation, or he quoted him in his book, and he was an earlier writer that was into Phoenician history, and Seneca Neaphion, or Neaphion, was he didn't believe in myths or anything of that nature. If you came to him with all of that, he'd turn you away. All he wanted to know and learn about was the truth about what actually happened.
Truth.
Yeah, so Chenafion, he basically denounced myths, and he was a Phoenician writer, and he basically denounced myths, and if it wasn't for Eusebius writing his quotes within his books, it would have been lost to history forever. So in that aspect, he actually saved that part of Phoenician history. So
Hmm.
that's
I heard the
one
name
thing.
before. Centurion Ape. What does he do? You're
Now, Sanitara Naphion was a writer
this name before.
before the whole thing with Eusebius and everything.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. Well,
um,
can you? Okay, I
he
apologize for interrupting.
was
What were you saying?
basically the guy that he wanted to. He took quotes from him because he was a pagan.
No, Baba, I have that. That's not the part. I like to know who he is and what he does.
Well, basically, Sennacherib was, well, first of all, he's a free man, and he
Yeah.
was a Phoenician
What he
historian. He
does.
was also a writer. He would write about the truth whenever he found it, and he would always search for stories of the past. So he was basically one of the first historians in
The
history
truth.
back when we call our history ancient history. So he was like one of the beginning, the first ones to do it.
Was he exposing the truth about like the homosexuality practices and stuff like that, or is that completely separate? Okay, completely separate.
I've had that question before, and I've had discussions about it. And the thing you have to understand is, like, it was a different time back then. Like, homosexuality wasn't even a word back then. It wasn't even termed that way.
It was just because like love was the like it's yeah, it wasn't really considered homosexuality. It was just sexuality.
You got to a lot of cultures back then and civilizations didn't even, it wasn't even a issue, and a lot of them actually practiced it.
Yeah, like, but it's crazy because only in certain cultures, like certain cultures, it was normalized, and other cultures, it was not even a thought type of thing. So it's just interesting to listen to and absorb again. But okay, I'm going to mute for a second, but I'm listening. Okay, I'll be right back.
Well, a good example of what I'm trying to say is, like, back in when they came out with the Iliads, okay, what we read in school was very watered down, all right. But if you read the original text, you would find out that there was a lot of things in there that was not very good. It had homosexuality in it, a lot of homosexuality, and it also referred to grown men having sex with boys, pedophiles basically, and it was pretty bad.
And you're talking in regards to the acts with children, or are you speaking in general? Because what I'm hearing is specific, and if I'm incorrect, I don't mind being incorrect. I'll retrace. But what I'm saying is, you're talking about how it's becoming more normal for people to basically have.
No, I'm talking about back then during that time period. Today it's unacceptable, but back then it was everywhere. It was acceptable according to a lot of civilizations. They practice it, and I mean a lot of civilizations.
Having sex with children, we're talking about, or homosexual. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying.
Now, being honest, I can't really say either of the two are different according to that time period. I really don't believe they saw it as something that was different. It wasn't. It was just something that was normal to them that they did.
But it's not, because they're attempting to normalize it. They're putting people in place.
Now, see, this is an example of what I'm talking about. Like you're relating to the here and now, and what I'm trying to say is like there's a time where this stuff was done. And none of this really has anything to do with the kind of stuff that's happening today. You know what I'm saying? It's this is just the way it was back then for them. This was their way of life. Um, and today, with the issues that are going on today, it's just not the same. Is what I'm basically getting at. It's
Do you feel homosexuality has something is connected to increased interest in children's sexuality, or do you think it's unrelated?
now on that topic. The easiest way for me to say it like is like this. Okay, there has always been homosexuality and pedophilia since the beginning of civilization, cultures, um, and there's evidence written in the literature all over the place, not in one culture, but quite a few of them. So with that, I mean, I personally don't feel like it's an epidemic that just recently started. You know what I'm saying? It's been around. As a matter of fact, it's less prevalent now than what it used to be, in my opinion, because of the literature. I've mentioned the Iliads, and that's just one of many. Now, what I have noticed is that it's become more of an issue today than what it was back then. Okay, people back then didn't really make an issue out of homosexuality. It was just they made references to it, but the word homosexuality was never really coined. Another thing too, like I see a lot of people who have this idea that like we came from this golden age, and it's farthest from the truth. Everything that I've read that concerns history shows that humans have come from a very brutal past. There was never any kind of golden age. If you want a good example, you just look at the Assyrians, the ancient Assyrians. They were very brutal. The Greeks, okay, the Greeks, for example, would take and murder their children if they were born deformed or with any problems. But then after that, they would turn around and make criticisms towards the Phoenicians, saying that they sacrificed their babies to their gods. You know what I'm saying? So in their mind, it was okay to kill your baby if your baby was deformed, but sacrificing them for your god, that was a totally different thing. And it was always like that. It's crazy how all the mentality back then was. You know what I'm saying?
Syrians, excuse me, are they Arab descent or?
Yeah, the Assyrians. Now, before I answer that question, I want to bring up something from what we've just been discussing when it concerns the Assyrians. Okay, now when I was talking about brutality in that time period, the Assyrians is a real good example of what I was referring to. There is documented amounts of tablets that's been collected from the Assyrians, and within those tablets, you can hear about how brutal they were towards their women. I mean, some of the stuff that they did just towards their women is completely mind blowing. So that is one good example of the brutality that took place back then. And that's not even mentioning what they did to their enemies. They would take the skin off their enemies and put it on the walls of Nineveh. But besides that, with your question about them being Arab, now a lot of people today even have an issue, or they don't understand the time period back then, and this goes back to what I was talking about understanding the time. There was a movie that came out here recently about Persian, or no, it was somebody from that time period in the movies, and the guy was white. And a lot of people had a fit about it. Well, they didn't know the history about that. The truth is that before the Arab invasion, the majority of people in that region was either Arab, or no, they were Aryan, or they were Semitic. So,
I mean, but everything came from Africa. Like the land literally was split off. It was the same people to the extent of which, like I said, I'm talking about way beyond there being cultures defined and different type of quote unquote races. Just as the people, it's that being the center. That's why they call it the heart. And then it breaks off. So based off of where your location is and just what season it is going to determine the type of skin complexion that you have. This is something that we often forget as well, because you can be very, very light skinned, but very, 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 by, I guess, denomination or nationality, African American or African or of African descent. But that technically is true for almost everyone, actually everyone, because if that, I mean, that's actually a human. We're going to just be fair about it. And when you do that type of, we look at it like that, at least from that extent, is the same culture, or not the same culture, but like we are all the same people, and we just got spread out. And we kind of walk over that part of the story, or am I incorrect? Where was that not?
now, granted, you're right about that when it comes to environment. Environment over time can affect the color of your skin and
I
stuff
can
like
hear
that.
you.
But there's more important things to understand too when it comes to history. Like DNA is one of the newer things that's coming into play. But then there's also linguistics as well as archaeology. So there's a lot of different factors that are taking place there that has to be understood. And a lot of people have an issue with racism these days, and that right there by itself causes a lot of problems in archaeology and history and being historians, because that's something that has to be calculated when determining, what the history of man is.
How
So
do you understand what's true or what's not true? And what makes it to where,
the thing that is most important is hard data. Okay, now you got to understand we come from uh, we come from a lot of lore. Our history is full of lore, and it goes all the way back, myths and lore, and things that just aren't true. Okay, and it's in our writings all over the place. And for a historian and an archaeologist and all of these people who do the research, they have to go through all that stuff, and they have to come up with the hard data and try to understand what's true and what's not true when it comes to that.
I feel, and you're saying that race is important in regards to knowing the truth about it, and
Not racism. Not. That's not what I'm saying.
oh, I was just going to ask you a question. I was just using that as the lead-in because so you know what I'm referring to. So when you're saying like race is important, and then it's something for you to be able to know, I just would like to wonder or ask you: do you feel as though you'd not be able to learn the same amount of history without being able to equate it to race, or?
Yeah. Basically, what I'm saying is like races and cultures generally do the same thing, and they have.
Do the same things?
No. Technically, I'm saying that races and cultures generally do the same thing.
Right. Regardless of race, right? Regardless of race, it'll be different races doing the same thing, right?
No, actually, in some cases, yeah. Uh, Regardless of race, because some cultures had different races in them. But generally, they kind of go hand in hand when it comes to what I'm talking about. This has to do more with the behaviors and what people did and the differences in each culture and recognizing those differences so that they could identify these different cultures so that they could understand like where they were located and where they came from. And that had to do with linguistics and archaeology as well. You know, hard
I
data.
completely understand what you're saying, but you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm listening to you. You're no. Listen, let me just please. I'm just asking a question. Literally, you're saying that it's important to understand these separations in order for us to understand who we are, despite the fact that among studying these separations, they are quite often more similarities, which I feel as though does that not draw us back to us being of one? I understand race is important, but can we not use it as a way for us to be able to actually see how we're more correlated and connected as a less than how we're all separated and this is this culture and this is that culture? Can we not bring it back together? That's all I was asking.
Okay, so let me try to break this down a little bit better. Okay, through textiles, for example, textiles and migration patterns and DNA and archaeological finds are what is important here. And you know, you keep mentioning differences and differences. Yeah, there's differences that are being researched, but you got to understand that because of these differences, it actually does, you know, kind of show freaking the similarities as well. They need to do this in order to, you know, find out what the migration patterns are of certain civilizations so that they can
Oh, so they
figure out
started somewhere
where
else
they're
and they moved.
coming
That's what
from.
migration is, right? When
So,
they start, yeah. Okay.
yeah, it's when cultures and travel, you know, from one place to another. And when I refer to textiles, I'm talking about like blankets, okay, and the patterns that are put into it. So, whenever one culture creates a certain blanket in a certain style, what they can do is they can remember that style and they can go to another culture and
Mm.
remember that style as well. And after they've done the research and they know the patterns of those blankets, then they can say this cloth was made from this culture and this cloth was made from this cloth culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it.
And yeah, that's basically the way that they do their research when it comes to historians, archaeologists, linguistics, and now the new thing is DNA. You know, people are or the new big fad in historical science is DNA and doing DNA to determine the migration patterns, which a lot of linguistics or people in linguistics are having issues with. They don't really like that too much.
Yeah, because DNA can be altered. I mean, you can, yeah, you can genetically mutate things into certain stuff, influenced by humans, influenced by my natural occurrences. There are different things that can cause DNA to shift and can manipulate findings. Yeah, I know. I've been a privy.
Well, Karma Love, we've had a really, really good conversation, and believe it or not, I think that we have covered a lot of things that were not only historical, but there are a lot of things that kind of touch on some pretty, I would say, controversial things that are going on in the world today, and I think that's, to me, what's the most important part about it, where two people can sit down and talk about controversial issues in an intelligent way, and I really think that that's what we did tonight. And I really do appreciate you being here. But I think that it's probably best to end the stream now, because it's actually at the right point where we need to do it. I would like to thank you for being with me, and we can have this talk at a later time. I've given you some material and stuff that you can look over, and we could talk about it later on when we get back into Phoenician theology and stuff. And I appreciate you being here, and we could talk later, okay?
All right. Have a good night. Be safe.